Thanks for coming. I mean, I know it's very rainy outside, but I'm glad you guys made it here. I think this meetup, it's called The Power of Whiteboards, and I saw a lot of whiteboards here, but actually I did like a big diversion. I hope I'm not the only procrastinator, but when I was making my deck, I was like, oh, actually, I want to talk more about processes and basically more into like what is the design process and design thinking, and I think we all heard about it. And if you've been a designer for a while, I think you probably do it day to day. And then for people who are a little bit more, maybe just starting off in the UX UI, probably never heard of it or kind of just dabbling in it. So I think that would be kind of our mindset today. And I'm just, I will have a big takeaway here. So just hold on that. So I want to first, I guess, introduce myself and talk a little bit who I am. So I'm Leandro. I'm actually from the Philippines. I was born in Manila, moved to Toronto when I was a kid with my family. So I grew up there. Actually studied graphic design, and then after school I kind of just fell into like more digital experience agencies. So from there, when you're working at Critical Mass or Saatchi, it's mostly kind of just project based and delivery. So you're just doing a lot more UI and like making things look pretty and websites. And even like, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, these could be like flash banners and microsites. So those are like my first projects. After a while in Toronto, so I worked in agencies for 3 years, and then my first real product role was actually in a bank. So it's called Royal Bank of Canada. Is there any Canadians in the room? Oh man, okay, no. But anyways, Royal Bank Canada, it's like kind of a big bank. It's basically like Deutsche Bank or whatever. And that was sort of my first product experience. I was in the mobile team, and why it's super exciting is because we basically redesigned like the whole mobile app. And from today, like it's a pretty cool app. I mean, if you ever move to Canada, I guess you'll see it, but then it's not relevant. I moved here 2 years ago, and I worked at Zalando, and I think there's a couple of people who probably worked at Zalando here, because I think half of Berlin has either have friends or work there. And then I was working there for search and browse, so if you're looking for clothes and you can't find it, it's probably my fault or whoever came after me. And yeah, so after a few years, I went to Bain & Company, tried it out for a few months, and it was not for me. It's a consulting place. And now I'm in SoundCloud, so kind of just a big journey there. My main focus now, I guess, is more like product strategy and design thinking. Even though I kind of focus a lot more on the user interface and visual at the beginning, I want to talk to you about like how I got to more of the strategy part. So the biggest takeaway I think for this presentation would be a framework for your next problem solving session. So this is activities to empower your design workshop. So either this is a whiteboarding challenges. Has anyone done whiteboarding challenges on their interview? Yes, that was a big surprise for me. I mean, when I moved to Berlin and all these startups are asking me, oh yeah, come in for an on-site, do a whiteboarding challenge. I'm like, that was a whiteboarding challenge. I mean, for us, I guess in North America, it's a bit different. It's all about your book and like having your process there and like really explaining it on your book. So I've never experienced whiteboarding. So when I did whiteboarding challenges, it was really like tough for me. But this framework should work for your whiteboarding challenges, whether if it's an interview or if it's like a brainstorming session within your product teams, or kind of just another alignment meeting with your product managers and your devs. So I'll cut it to 3 different sections here. So 1, 2, 3. 1 is understanding it, 2 is building it, and then 3 is wrapping it. I guess I really just wanted to put it on everything. But the first one would be like the who's and the whys. So these basically is who are your users and why and what's your goals, blah, blah, blah. 2 is their diverge and converge. And 3 is connecting dots, so basically wrapping up your whole session. So you'll realize it's very similar to basically a design thinking or design processes that we're all aware of. So there's definitely overlaps, but I think the main thing that we want to keep in mind is this is a framework. It's not a rule. I'm not telling you like, oh, you have to do this A, B, C. Of course, we have our own styles and we have our own challenges, and depending where you work, then you have to tailor that. So the first part we're going to talk about is understanding it. So define the who's and the whys. So I really kind of break this down into 3 points. So within understanding it, you want to get to your who's first. I mean, we're all sort of product designers, and we need to figure out who our users are. So these are just some activities at the bottom, like mental models, user stories, jobs to be done, pain points, and persona. So these are just, all these kind of cliche words and buzzwords that everyone kind of talks about, but we don't really know, like, how do we get to know our users? And these are from like user research or like doing interviews, doing expert interviews even within your company, and really just finding out who your users are and like empathizing with them. Number two is our the whys, so your user problem and user goal. So you should really dig in deep on what the major user problem really is and define the user goal. So I think as designers, we should really focus on like the user and not just the business. So I think depending on the space you're working at, we really get bombarded with business goals. I mean, it's always like, we want to make this much money. This is our KPI. We need to make this happen, blah, blah, blah. But as a designer, you should be the one that's saying, what are our user goals? How are we contributing to the product requirements? A lot of my things, at least from my experiences, all my product requirements document is full of business goals. And I think I'm the person who's always like, what is the real user problem we're trying to figure out? What is their user goal? What is like that human thing that we're solving? So not just like to make money or to move metrics, but what is that problem? And I think a good video that I've watched is probably from Julie, like the VP of Facebook, where there's a YouTube video of her, you should check it out. Basically how Facebook designers like think of the user problems and your user goals. Number three is defining the scope. So once you figure out, your users and problem and their goals, define some constraints. So scope down the user problem, like is it gonna be mobile, is it web, how should it be accessible? So accessibility is a big topic right now. Set some constraints and really focus on the session. So an example for whiteboarding interviews is like, maybe time box yourself the first 5 minutes. I want to figure out who are my users, what are their problems, what are their goals, and then define some constraints. So from there, I'm just going to go through some activities that can help you do that. So let's pretend this is a whiteboard. I think we've seen all matrices before. This is an example where you can have a matrix of like basically user needs, user goals, assumptions, and constraints. And if we think about this as a whiteboard, and if you're in a room, in a workshop, what this does is it really fosters collaboration and co-creation, right? So you can either do it with stickies, you can do it straight to the whiteboard. And what you want to do is really spark the conversation, get people to think about like the user needs, user goals, assumption, and constraints, and just put it out there. Another activity you can do around these sessions is probably user journey mapping. I mean, we've done all the user journeys, and there's different ways you can do it, but I think this is just like the most generic one, and you can Google more on examples. But basically on the left-hand side, you have your touch points. So could either be anything depending on your project. So is the touch point on web or mobile? Or you can think of touch points as a user journey, like is there brand awareness in your brand as a user? Have they downloaded the app? Where did they see it? Was it in an ad? Was it in Instagram? Blah, blah, blah. So those are touch points, and actions are basically what have they done? Have they clicked on it, downloaded it, blah, blah, blah. What are their motivations? Any open questions for that user, pain points, and then kind of business opportunities are the things that would probably get the business and product talking. Is there any questions so far? Cool, so we're moving on to build it. So this is like basically your diverge and converge on design thinking. This is basically your ideation and your design part. So kind of three points here. So you have your ideation, which is diverge. So the more the better, just jot down, steam ahead, try not to think too much. I mean, a couple of more well-known activities here are Crazy Eights, solution sketches, like the whole design sprint gig. So that's what happens in diverge. The next one is basically like while you're doing on your diverge or while you're kind of ideating, what you want to do is really collaborate with your peers and start clustering. So depending on how you're running your workshop or your sessions during your kind of like brainstorming session, you have to talk out loud. This helps to narrate your thinking process, which is super vital in this stage, right? Like, I mean, not everyone in the room is creative and designer. They're not reading your mind. You have to really talk out loud on what your reasonings are, why you're doing this, why you're doing that. And then number three is converge. So this is like prioritizing. Pick one or two ideas to develop for them a few minutes. I mean, there's also, again, different activities to do this, and I'll show you guys in the next slides. And this is just kind of what I showed you. I mean, this is like a typical design sprint. If you Google like design sprint, Crazy 8 solution sketches, it's probably the first thing that you would see. So prioritization, I think I wanted to show again the matrix. So prioritization matrix is like, on the left side, you have your assumed user value. And then at the bottom, you have your feasibility or effort. I mean, this is kind of for the dozen room. This is like, your estimation, right? So you can see like low on the bottom left there, then high at the top, and then high on the top right. What you do with your team or what you can do by yourself if you're doing an interview is start putting your ideas or features down in these quadrants. So at the bottom left, if it's, of course, like low value, user value, or low effort, then maybe it's go to the backlog. You don't really prioritize that right now. And then On the right side here, of course, it's very high effort and low user value, so you obviously like wouldn't care about much. And then your top is actually your prime here. So this is like your quick wins because it's like high user value, low effort, and then big projects are basically like your high effort and then high user value. So these are the things that could go into like discovery sprints where you need more research to back it up. Rapid. So connecting the dots. So connecting the dots, I mean, like there again, you might see the framework here. So 3 points again. Connect, so go full circle. So I think a lot of us designers, we forget, we spend all this work at the beginning and we forget to really like reiterate why we did this and why is this our solution. So we forget to go back to the actual user and the problems that we just kind of mentioned at the beginning. So how is your solution actually potentially solving the problem? And at this point, you want to start looking at both the user problem and the business problem you're solving. Second is feedback. I mean, you would be getting feedback the whole way through, hopefully. But what I'm trying to get at here is look at the other edges. So look at the sharp edges. And if you start estimating, okay, let's do this in 4-8 sprints, or maybe if you're in an interview, I only have 15 minutes left, and this is all the ideas I've had. And then kind of just mention that, okay, I know that this could happen and that could happen, but we can figure it out later on. So kind of just already proactively pointing out the sharp edges and then coming up with some solutions and scenarios. Measuring, basically on measuring, now what's next? I think it's very important to know like how you can measure like a certain feature or a certain idea, and not just like within the user lab or not just through an A/B test, but what is really define what success and failure looks like. So that's both for the user and the business. So when you say success for the user, failure for the business, how does that correlate to each other? And another framework you can kind of use for that is probably the HEART framework. I used it once, and basically it's by Kerry Rowland from Google. So what it introduced, it aims to help really measure like less tangible things for like in the business side, but really for us, it's very important as product designers. So on the left side, you have like happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, task success, and then goal signals metrics. I'll like have one example here. So engagement, a user goal could be user enjoy the content as so much that they keep discovering and they keep scrolling down, for example, on Instagram. A signal that they give out is like the time users spend on engaging on content and they just keep like wanting to discover more. And metrics are usually like your metrics on the business side. So like average number of minutes spent engaging on the site per day. So this is, I think, a good framework, and you guys can check it out more in Google. So yeah, kind of just wrapping it up. I mean, understanding, building it, wrapping it. I think my main kind of goal here is to just make sure that we remember and kind of have a framework when we're coming into these sessions. You know, like when your PM kind of like brings you to the session, like, oh, we need to do this in 2-3 weeks. Like, I think the framework always helps me, at least in my experience, to really understand, you know, the problem, the goals, the constraints, building it. So like having a sketch out, converging, prioritizing, and then wrapping it up. So like really connecting the dots. So yeah, I mean, I kind of just said like takeaway. Hopefully this framework helps you guys on your next session and then empower you to like feel more confident when you're trying to solve problems. And then any final words? I think be ready to get grilled. So a lot of, I think, interviews that I've done or like interviews I'm doing, like I think of course we all get grilled, and I'm probably gonna get grilled by you guys in the next few slides. So just be prepared to ask questions and make sure that you connect it with kind of like the content that you mentioned earlier. Spark the conversation. So I think it's very easy to kind of just like talking by yourself and like talking in your own thoughts, but you have to really spark the conversation within your peers, or even if you're in an interview within like the people in the room. I think that's very important. And so this is like the feedback, how do you co-create and all that. And last, I think facilitate and lead. I mean, it's a little bit controversial because I think facilitation is one thing when you're facilitating a workshop and you're kind of step back. And there's a difference between like kind of leading, where you're kind of like really leading all the ideas. So I think facilitating and leading is like, there's a really good balance of being able to facilitate a room and then still leading the conversation where like nothing is getting lost or nothing is like kind of a waste. So I think that's a very important thing to remember too. But yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you.